Are you, or someone you know, a caregiver? Are you feeling exhausted, stressed, and on the brink of burnout? What are the common signs of caregiver burnout? Is there help to relieve you of your draining thoughts and natural feelings? Hello, my name is attorney Ramsey Bahrawy, and welcome to Your Money, Your Life. In this segment, my guest is Michael Bloom, founder of Bloom Coaching and Performance, LLC, and the author of the book, The Accidental Caregiver Survival Guide, Your Roadmap to Caregiving Without Regret. Michael, welcome to Your Money, Your Life. It's great to have you on the program.
Thank you, Ramsey. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, you wrote the book, Accidental Caregivers Survival Guide. Tell us a little bit about you, the book, and what motivated you to write the book.
Sure. Well, back in 2009, I got a frantic call from my mother. My parents were living about 5 miles away from me, and they were elderly at that time, 82 years old. My mother was a 5-year cancer survivor. In fact, she was a miraculous cancer survivor. About 5 years earlier, she had stage 4B lymphoma, and it was thought that chemo would kill her before the cancer. So although she survived cancer, she was very frail and weak and needed a lot of physical assistance. So my father took over all of the household chores and responsibilities and was really managing everything superbly. So in this one summer morning of 2009, very early, I got a frantic call from my mother because she said that my dad was acting very strangely. Normally, he would get their breakfast and their medication. It was very regimented. He was a retired chemist. He was the most organized person in the world that I knew. And on this particular morning, when she asked about the medication and the breakfast, he got upset and stormed out of the room and upstairs to his office, which prompted her phone call to me. So I drove over. I lived only about 5 miles apart, and I kept thinking what in the world could be going on. The night before, I had a great conversation with him. He told me he had gone food shopping and banking. He even got extra groceries for me. So when I arrived at the house, I greeted my mother briefly, and I went upstairs to check on my dad. And when I knocked on the door, a very faint voice said, "Come in." And when I opened the door, he was slouched in his chair, and I thought maybe he had a stroke. So I immediately called 911. The paramedics came out, and when they checked his vitals, we discovered that he had a heart rate of 25.
Oh, wow.
And after getting checked out at the hospital, we determined that he had a catastrophic heart failure event. They did put a pacemaker in, which stabilized him from a cardiac standpoint, but unfortunately the event probably had taken place mainly in his sleep the night before, so he ended up with vascular dementia, and from that point forward he would never be the same. So he would need 24-hour support, thus my mother would need 24-hour support. And the reason I titled my book The Accidental Caregiver Survival Guide is most family caregivers like me, in a very unplanned, unexpected, unprepared way, something happens, like a medical crisis or an accident. And because of your dedication to your loved one, you step in without thinking. You just jump into that pool of care. You don't test the waters to see that they're comfortable first before, like in the swimming pool. You actually jump in feet first, and your life is never the same afterwards. So that's the reason for the book.
Tell our viewers why they should pay special attention to this book. Is it some sort of a resource for caregivers, or is it something else? Why should they pay attention?
Sure, that's a great question. Well, the idea of the Accidental Caregiver Survival Guide, and the subtitle is Your Roadmap to Caregiving Without Regret. I determined in those first months of caring for both of my parents, and fortunately I have professional caregiving background, having worked as an administrator and a direct supporter for people with developmental disabilities. So I had 20 years of experience in my tool belt of understanding the elder and disability system. But any caregiver, when they jump into that pool of care, they think that they could do it all themselves and act like Superman or Superwoman. It's not a sustainable pathway. And the reason why most caregivers end up experiencing regret is really two reasons. One, that they may get, because of all the stress and overwhelm and exhaustion they deal with, they may say or do something during the journey of care that they wish they could take back after they're no longer in that role and the person's no longer around. And the other main thing is that during the journey of care, caregivers are all in for their loved one. They come first, understandably, and every other resource that's around the family is for the patient or the loved one. The caregiver ends up putting their own lives on the back burner, and the idea is you can balance it. You can provide care to your loved one and still do things for yourself, because you'll never get those months or years back. So the idea is to provide practical tools and strategies in a very short and powerful way so that caregivers can quickly learn how to make the caregiving journey work for them and their loved one.
Before we get into your tools and strategies, it's very common that an elder will need some assistance, whether it's a ride to the doctor's office, or whether it's with shopping, or whether it's taking care of the home. But caregiving is really much, much more than that, isn't it? And I was wondering if you would detail for our viewers exactly what's involved in being a caregiver.
Sure. So there are all of those physical tasks and responsibilities. I often like to say when a caregiver is in a caregiving role, that many times they're managing even more than one household. So they're kind of spinning multiple plates of responsibilities that tend to overflow. But that's the physical responsibilities that need to be taken done, the transportation, the food shopping, the menu planning, the medication management, the doctor's appointments. But there's the emotional side of things. So when you're dealing with a loved one who has experienced some sort of medical crisis or a car accident, or even somebody who's returned from war after an injury, they've lost independence. They've lost a level of functioning. So there's a great deal of spiritual and emotional support that a caregiver then provides to their loved one. And again, all the resources and all the attention is provided to the loved one. But when you're in that journey of care, every painful treatment that the loved one goes through, every setback of news that the loved one hears from the doctor, although the caregiver is not experiencing it themselves directly physically, you feel it. And the idea is to really provide that level of support so they can balance and get support for the caregiver's physical and emotional and spiritual needs as well.
You know, it's my experience, not just personal experience, but experience through clients of mine. I'm an elder law attorney, that family caregiving oftentimes represents some sort of a transition within the family. And oftentimes the family's not ready for that transition. How can people be more prepared for that transition and understand what the changing roles are going to be? That's
a great question too. One of the ways is to be prepared and discuss things while everyone's healthy. You know, a lot of people like you have tools and resources that are out there for people to do preparation. I was very fortunate in that my dad did not avoid those tough subjects. So he had everything lined up, from healthcare proxies, powers of attorney, and everything. So when he was no longer capable of making decisions, all of those things were seamlessly in place so my mother and I could take them over. I would say for every family, engage in conversation while you're healthy in terms of what your wishes are, because that's the most important. And a lot of elders are, even my dad fortunately was not one of those people, but a lot of the clients that I work with, the elder is resistant to having those types of discussions because it's morbid, it's scary, they don't want to think that they'll ever reach that. But the key is, don't just put it on the elder to fill out those forms. One of the biggest recommendations I give to families is let people of every generation fill out a form, because any of us could take a ride down when I leave you today and go hit that highway, God forbid, I could have a car accident and be unable to take care of myself. So it's so important, no matter what age we are, that we have those documents lined up and let everybody have that dialogue.
I completely agree. I mean, my view is once you're 18, you're the age of majority, you should start considering some of these documents.
Absolutely.
Because an unfortunate situation can happen at any time. None of us have a crystal ball. Tomorrow is not promised to us. It's that simple. You mentioned earlier that people, as they grow older, they become ill, they lose some of their independence. With losing that independence, there's also anger, there's also resentment. How does a caregiver deal with communicating with that person who's angry, who's resentful? Is there a certain way of communicating?
Well, of course, every family situation is unique, and every dynamic between two individuals is unique too, based on history. So I really think there's a couple ways to approach that. One is, it's so important, and I hear this a lot from caregivers, that they tend to feel trapped in a situation, like there is no other way to do it, and they need to accept sometimes the abusive treatment they may get, or what they perceive as abusive treatment from their loved one. And I say it's important for caregivers to recognize you're making a choice to serve. When you feel trapped, like there's no other way to do it, that's really a mindset that can set you back. It's so important whether you're dealing with a loved one, and granted, loved ones are dealing with some pretty tough things and challenges along their journey of getting treatment. But you don't need to take certain treatment. I think it's critical for caregivers to set limits and have honest and open discussions about what they will take, and also say too, here's the pathway for me to continue to provide you the highest quality of care and loving care. We need to get outside help as well. So there are many professionals out there that you can get from, clinical social workers and others that can really help to navigate some of those challenges, because again, the things that the caregiver and the loved one will deal with during the journey of care truly are life and death, and truly are the scariest decisions that we ever have to deal with in life. So it's understandable that people would feel scared and sometimes be angry and have resentment, because those that we're closest to are the people we'll share that with.
Now, I have a question with regards to how family caregivers are chosen. It's, again, my experience through my clients pretty much, that oftentimes one member of the family is chosen as the caregiver. My questions are, and it's a two-part question. Number one, is there any sort of a method that's used to select this person? And if there isn't a method, should there be a method? Should there be some sort of rational way to figuring out who should be the caregiver? And number two, should it just be one person? Or is it better to share the load, so to speak?
Absolutely. Well, I think traditionally, caregivers have been the oldest daughter in a family when elders need support. So that's kind of been the traditional expectation. But actually, numbers, some statistics recently show that as many as 40% of family caregivers are now men. And I'm one that served in that army of care, that caring force of men. Now, I had no siblings to turn to, so obviously I went into the role. I think that in terms of there being a prescriptive pathway, a lot of times the way the person is chosen, if we don't use just the gender issue, it tends to be the person that maybe doesn't have so many other responsibilities in their life, for the most part, one. So if they're not raising a family, or geographic considerations come into play, because we know now, unlike generations ago, generations of families grew up in the same town. They lived within a certain radius. Now people are very spread apart, even globally. So a lot of times it's a geographic consideration. The most important thing is whoever steps into that role as the primary caregiver, there is that risk of getting into caregiver isolation island. And I say that's an island you want to get voted off of as soon as possible. And the best way to do that is to determine what are all the tasks and responsibilities that you need to fulfill as a caregiver, and share those with others. One of the biggest mistakes that I think causes conflict and resentment within families is a primary caregiver who's under a great deal of stress and burden and responsibility, instead of asking for help and providing choice, will become very directive. And when another family member, typically a sibling, doesn't follow through, they almost view that sibling as a letdown or a deadbeat family member. And one of the things I say, if you gather all of the information of what you do on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, on an ongoing basis, and create this this known list of supports that are there, you can actually provide that menu of supports to different family members and let them self-select what they can do to be helpful, because people are much more likely to do something and contribute if they can contribute based on their talent, skills, and what they feel they're good at. And even too, if somebody's never done anything, I always say to the primary caregivers I work with, let them choose one thing. You'd be surprised if this person chooses one thing, does it well, and you give them a lot of positive reinforcement, they're more likely to do the next task that you expect them to help with. So I think that helps with that family dynamic, to spread the responsibility.
As people enter the holiday seasons, families are used to getting together. They get together for religious holidays, for Thanksgiving, for the 4th of July, and for many people, holidays in general are stressful. It has to be even more stressful somebody who is both the family member and the caregiver. Any tips, any strategies for how a caregiver can manage the stress that comes with being a family member and a caregiver at the same time during a holiday?
Yeah, that's a really important topic to consider. And during the holidays, one of the best things you could do, what ends up happening is people's abilities decline, and family dynamics change, and families spread apart. And I've seen this even with my own family, my own extended family. Traditional ways of celebrating holidays that were so treasured for many, many years are no longer the way of doing things. So one of the keys is to be open to creating new traditions that honor the abilities for people to participate in. And I think the best way for a caregiver to sustain their own energy through a very stressful holiday season of wanting to make it the best possible for their loved one, maybe other family responsibilities, work responsibilities, is figure out what would give you a little joy during the holiday season and schedule it. Do something for yourself, give yourself something to look forward to. Maybe it's just going away and even getting a massage. Maybe when people want to put things on a holiday list for a gift, one of the best things a caregiver could do is give a wish list of what could be done. Maybe it's providing payment for a respite few hours so they could go out and enjoy some activity that they don't traditionally get to do. So I think it's really incumbent upon the family to dialogue and work together about new ways to celebrate the holidays and what they can do to really honor and support that caregiver. So when the new year comes, they have the energy to keep doing what they're doing.
So you're saying with regard to respite, perhaps consider what I like to refer to as adult daycare, or perhaps bring in a paid caretaker,
Sure.
Spend some time in the house. Anything that allows the actual family caregiver to take some time off, recharge his or her battery, so to speak. Makes sense.
Oh, it absolutely does. If I might just add one more thing.
Sure.
One of my mantras for caregivers is put chocolate in your pill box. And the reason I say that is when you're in the journey of care, we're so focused on medication regimens and meal times and everything being prescriptive, and we follow that all to a T. But when it comes to taking care of our own needs, and the chocolate's a metaphor, of course, for dose yourself with joy here and then. You know, one of the things that happens when people enter caregiving is activities that they previously really enjoyed and valued before they entered that caregiving role, they no longer do. Maybe they lose interest in that, or they don't feel they have the time to participate. So it's so vital for caregivers to think about what would give them joy and satisfaction now. Find a way to schedule it, plan it in your calendar, and one of the greatest gifts that others can provide to you is to help you make those things happen in your calendar so you get those needed breaks. Because self-care is not selfish. And if caregivers take time to take care of themselves along the journey of care, they're going to be able to provide higher quality support to their loved one over the long term because they won't feel so stressed.
Well, I'd like to follow up on that because I've read in numerous sources that family caregiving can result in both physical as well as emotional strain. That strain can result in stress. And ultimately that stress, if it gets heavy enough, can result in what's referred to as caregiver burnout.
Correct.
What is caregiver burnout? And tell our viewers what it is so they will know how to minimize the warning signs of caregiver burnout.
That's an extremely important question. And, you know, unfortunately, we aren't born with a little gauge inside our brains that says burnout level being reached. Look out, watch out for it, right? We do know that there are certain activities that we do on a routine basis, like we're taught from little children that we must brush our teeth at least once, twice, or maybe even some people do it 3 times a day. And if you do that, you'll avoid that nasty and painful trip to the dentist. We need to do the same things with our stress. So often what happens when folks are on the brink of burnout, caregivers are on the brink of burnout, the people around them may notice it before they do. And here are some of the signs to think about. Are you losing sleep at night? You know, maybe you've always traditionally had sleep, but you really have trouble shutting down your brain. You know, one of the things, especially for caregivers who are caring for a loved one that may have Alzheimer's or dementia, sleep is really a valued commodity, and you have to kind of sneak in sleep when you can because your loved one's schedule is really off from what your normal schedule might be. Appetite changes, increasing or decreasing appetite. I suffered from what I called the caregiver 40. So, which is when I was in the journey of family caregiver, and I'm still trying to work on working some of that out, was my way of coping was to eat. And one of the reasons was my dad had the vascular dementia and he no longer ate meals. So one of the tricks that I learned to help him nourish himself was I left snacks on the counter that he could graze at. So of course he grazed and I grazed. So he treated himself, I treated myself. And that was my way of coping with my stress. Increased headaches or migraines. You know, some caregivers will turn to, you know, unfortunately more prescription drug, abuse prescription drugs or increased alcohol use. The important thing to say with all of these stress levels is any one of those symptoms in and of themselves could be the result of some real physical concern happening with you. So I often recommend to caregivers, and I actually did this myself, increase the number of times during the year you see your primary care physician yourself. So you check and have a dialogue. Let your physician know you're caregiving. Because if they know that enters a whole new level of stress. And one of the other things too with this is to share, if you're having any concerns about physical changes that you may have, again, let it get tested out. The best thing you can do for yourself is to question your physician about something and say that it's really a non-issue. And if it's a non-physical issue, then you know it's some emotional stress relationship. If we don't deal with stress, that stress balloon continues to mount, blow up, and then it bursts. And the caregiver then achieves that burnout. And sometimes that can be really serious or end up in really serious physical ailment or condition or emotional breakdown. So it's so critical to really deal with stress and take times along the way to release it.
Let's get back to your book for a second, because
Sure.
earlier you mentioned you had tips and strategies. What tips and strategies do you mention in your book so that a caregiver can be successful? Because we've actually been talking on the negative side. Let's talk on the positive side.
Yeah, absolutely, sure. So one of the things I suggest is that the caregiver, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, you know, you're making a choice to serve. Each and every day when you get up in the morning and you're facing whatever responsibilities that you face, you again are making that, you know, you're making a commitment to serve. And I think one of the best things you can do as a caregiver is honor yourself for the fact that you are doing the best you can and making that commitment. One of the tools that I recommend, and which is part of the book, is using what I call a caregiving expectation agreement. I think one of the biggest things that leads to conflict between caregivers and loved ones is there's no clarity to the role. Because as I said, when caregivers start the role, wherever that happens, it's usually some crisis or accident that's come about. There's really no time to think about what's my role and responsibility, what tasks am I agreeing to do. You jump in, you do it, and then you kind of work it out along the way. But over time, that resentment will build up because there's not the clarity. So the idea, and in the book it describes some suggested roles and responsibilities that can meet those expectations. And one of the key ones is for both the caregiver and the loved one in their expectation role is to be open to being human, meaning that you will sometimes say things that you may wish that you don't. And that happens, that you are willing to seek forgiveness for this, because again, you're dealing with a very stressful situation. And when you have that dialogue, one of the things I use during, you know, for myself, I fortunately had a very good relationship with my parents. But after my father passed and I was, you know, dealing, and I moved in and was caring for my mom, I was not her spouse, I was her son. And there was a difference. Here she had a lifelong companion, I'm now in this role. The things that she may have been expecting me to do were things that he was doing that were in the house. We had different ways of operating. So it was so important for us to talk and clear up the role. And sometimes when an elder person who is really feeling a lot of physical pain, a lot of depression around losing functioning, they lose the positive feelings they have about life. They start to micromanage the little things that you're doing. And as a caregiver, that might get under your skin. So at times, I felt that I was lashing out. And so I always made a point not to go to bed upset and would apologize. 99% of the time, whenever I apologized, and this was only a dozen times, I'd say this happened over the course of 3 years, my mom said, I don't know what you're apologizing for. So imagine, I've used that story with other caregivers because a lot of times the regret that we may feel for things that we said or done during the journey of care that might leave us with guilt for years after a person comes may never have impacted the loved one the way we thought. So important to clear the air. And one of the ways you do that is to have this dialogue. And I think having an external agreement is a great way to focus the attention to that type of conversation.
In my law practice, I will write what are called caregiver agreements. They are agreements that set the parameters in terms of what care the older adult can expect, what care the caregiver must give, because it's set out in the agreement, and it also sets out compensation. How is the caregiver going to be compensated? And that compensation is oftentimes something that we're looking at as part of a spend-down technique with regard to Medicaid. And it's critical, and I can't highlight this more strenuously, it's critical to do when you have siblings. Because there will be disagreements, there is that sibling rivalry that always exists. And so when you have everything in writing and everybody knows exactly what's going to happen, there shouldn't be any disagreements. You know, now do people engage in these agreements? Unfortunately, not as often as they should. But I think you're right. It's very important to get expectations down in writing so everyone knows exactly what to expect.
The other thing to say about the agreement too, no agreement is set forever. So you can actually modify an agreement. And I think that's important to note too, because wherever you are today in the caregiving role and the loved one role might be different a year from now. And I think one of the biggest advantages to completing an agreement is the person that actually needs the most clarity for their role as a caregiver is the caregiver, him or herself. And the reason that they tend to let themselves down is because they haven't clearly defined that role. So they're trying to live up to an expectation that maybe isn't even reality. So even if a loved one is not cognitive anymore, you know, maybe has Alzheimer's or dementia, I recommend doing the agreement. And the caregiver part of the agreement I actually refer to as the caregiver manifesto. It's your manifesto for what you agree is that you're going to perform, and that gives you a guidepost so that you can live up to your own expectations.
Do you have any great stories to tell? I mean, I'm sure you've worked with a lot of people. Do you have a particular story that you like to share because of a great outcome, or maybe not such a great outcome, but it highlights a point that's in your book?
One of my favorite stories, and actually goes to the whole thing about siblings, is and the moral of the story is, don't just accept family history. I had a woman that I was working with who lived 200 miles away from her mother. Her mother was becoming very frail and needing more assistance. The woman herself had a challenged relationship with the mother, but her brother had no relationship with her mother because the mother and the brother had a falling out about a decade earlier. The two siblings had a good relationship. So my client, could not see her way out of this situation. I'm now doing everything. I'm leaving my family every weekend to spend weekends with my mom. I'm taking time off during the week from my job to take mom to medical appointments, so I'm staying during the week. She was taking all of this FMLA, family medical leave time, which her job was very flexible, wonderfully to do that, but she was burning out. So we had a dialogue about, why can't you all come together? And we sort of processed, could you talk to your mom and your brother about what this is doing to you? So that she did. She approached them both in a conversation. They actually met a couple the next Saturday for, I would say, beer and pizza in the mom's house. And they all sat down. Well, when they were talking, and the mother and the brother were open to this dialogue because, again, she asked for it. The mother said, I have all this work that needs done in the house. She was talking about things that were falling into disrepair. Her son was a contractor. So the next thing you know, the next Tuesday, after he was done with his job for the day, he went over and started doing work in her basement.
Very nice.
Well, the next thing you know, 2 weeks later, he's taking her to a medical appointment. So the bottom line is, be open with what you need. Ask people to come together to talk because things have changed, and the family was able to restore because of that and get some needed support, and therefore my client was able to back off a little bit. She still did most of what needed to be done, but it gave her comfort to know she could call her brother in a pinch too.
Great place for us to stop. Caretaking can be a breeding ground for resentment, anger, and broken relationships. This is because caregivers often put the needs of their loved ones, the care recipients, ahead of their own desires and goals. Michael Bloom is a certified professional coach and caregiving without regret expert. He helps to revitalize the lives and careers of both family and professional caregivers by providing them with coping strategies. This can be done in a private mentoring program or in a group workshop. In his Accidental Caregiver Survival Guide, Michael gives caregivers the roadmap to caregiving without regret. This guide also provides practical tips, tools, and coping strategies to recharge a caregiver's energy. Interested in revitalizing your own life while caring for your loved one? A good place to start is by visiting the bloomforcoach.com website. There you can learn how Michael Bloom can help you with the natural feelings that come with caregiving, such as anger, frustration, sadness, anxiety, and guilt. Don't forget to check out his Accidental Caregiver Survival Guide. In closing, I'd like to thank my guest, Michael Bloom, founder of Bloom Coaching and Performance, LLC, for his participation on this program. Michael, thank you very much. And as always, thank you to you, our viewers, for watching Your Money, Your Life. My name is Attorney Ramsey Bahrawy, Building Your Trust.